Call to order the Wednesday, October 9th meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial board created by the City of Ames. The board's purpose is to, is to decide on applications for home occupation permits, special use permits, exceptions, and variances to the zoning ordinance. Applications for conditional use permits in the floodplain, requests for reasonable accommodation because of a handicap, and appeal of decisions of the zoning enforcement officer. As a board of the city, we welcome all testimony. We make our decisions based on the facts and evidence as allowed under city code and presented in open meeting. Testimony before the board must be given under oath or affirmation. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that testimony be focused on new facts or evidence not already presented. We ask that you come to the microphone if you wish to speak so that your testimony will be audible and may be recorded. Before speaking, please complete an orange information card and hand it to the recording secretary. When you are testifying, please address your remarks to the board. We also ask that the proceedings be orderly. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board of citizens. We are not part of the city administration. We are served in our efforts by Benjamin Campbell, city planner, Julie Gould, city planner, Jackie Higgins, recording secretary, and Jane Chang, assistant city attorney. The order of proceedings for each application will be as follows. First, an oral statement summarizing the issues and procedural steps will be presented by the staff. Second, testimony and evidence will be presented by the applicant. Third, testimony may be heard from any members of the audience who wish to speak in support or in opposition to the appeal. Next, the board will give the applicant and the city staff an opportunity to present concluding summaries and arguments. And finally, the board will discuss the issues and evidence and come to a decision. First item of business tonight, approval of minutes of the meeting from September 11th, 2019.
I move to approve the minutes of September 11th, 2019.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The second item that was listed on our agenda for tonight is a request to continue from the September 11th, 2019 meeting to allow a carpet cleaning, water damage mitigation, and odor removal as a special home occupation at 4004 Arkansas Drive.
I'd like to retable that one to the next meeting.
Second?
That's a motion. I'll second it.
Oh, yes, I moved to sorry.
Been moved and seconded to retable. Is that a roll call or is that?
Roll call.
Roll call?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. The next item tonight is a variance to allow parking in the front yard at 1113 Maxwell Avenue. First, we'll hear from city staff.
Good evening. The request before you tonight is to the property owner of 1113 Maxwell Avenue is requesting a variance from the required front yard parking requirements. They are currently trying to get a valid LOC, letter of compliance, to operate this property as a rental. It is a single family, it is one unit, single family home. Part of the criteria to be a registered rental is to comply with parking requirements. That requires 2 parking stalls in this situation for this type of rental. Parking is not allowed in the front yard. Staff did include that section of code as an attachment to the staff report. So I can answer specific questions related to that if you would like. The applicant, so they've been working with the rental inspector on this, and this is what it's really fuzzy. So sorry, this is a 2017 aerial, and it's not that clear, but you can see the driveway essentially ended right here. And then there was a sidewalk to a door in the house here, and then this was sidewalk and green space. The 2019 aerial is much clearer. So they've essentially paved up to this entrance, which is still considered front yard parking. In order to comply with parking, they would need to park on the side or rear yard if there was room. The applicant found that there was room on the property to provide a parking stall on the side of the house. Staff has marked what is considered front yard. So if you extended the line of the front yard from this point over, everything on this side is front yard parking. Everything behind would be side or rear and be valid. So essentially they have 2 front yard parking stalls, which does not comply with code. So they're asking for a variance for the paving that they have and that they have added to remain. And so the variance would be to leave it as is on the 2019 aerial that you can see. In order to comply, they would essentially have to add additional paving over here to provide maneuvering area and then lead to a parking stall back here. So this is essentially, so then your front yard is here. So all of this would be paving. In order to approve a variance, there's 3 main criterion that are supposed to be met. There's an A, B, and C. B has some subparts of it. Staff found that only a few of those will be able to be met. Therefore, we recommended denial. But we can, if you have specific questions about the code section or the findings that we made for those criteria, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Questions for staff at this point in time?
Not at this time.
What is the definition of a front yard?
Front yard, so in that attachment, it just, in the code section, it describes essentially anything in front of the house. And that is from all facades. So that's why even though there's a jog in the house and it is just a small entrance over here, this is still considered front yard. And that attachment B, provides some diagrams that can show different situations of front yard parking when you're on a corner, when you're, different lot layout situations as examples.
And because there is no garage on this property, you can pave out to the property line?
You can. So there's no setback for paving. So you can pave up to the property line to get to what would be a code compliant parking spot.
So then even if there is a garage, there's no setbacks for paving?
For the driveway, correct.
Okay.
The questions?
I'll come up with something else, I'm sure. I usually do, don't I?
Yes, sir. We can come back to that unless you have any,
Go.
this particular.
Go right ahead.
The applicant, come up and speak, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Lisa Hine, and it's my husband.
Phil Spohr.
Thank you. Just a little bit of background.
Hold on.
We own Meadowlark Bass LLC.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm just looking here. Is it, do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes, we
Yes.
do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So just a little bit of background of how we got here. As Julie mentioned, we're trying to get the property into as a legal rental. We bought it a couple of years ago. Our daughter was living there. She moved out, and we decided we wanted to rent it and go through the process of actually making it an official rental, because the house was built in 1920. The person we bought it from, it was rented for 18, 20
Yeah.
years or something like that. Anyways, so we went through a lot of work, redoing the stairs to the basement, which if you've ever been in an old house, usually the stairs to the basement are pretty bad. Anyway, just trying to clean it up and fix it up. And the building inspector, Dan Thomas, said, well, got an issue with the parking. And we said, okay, fine. What do we need to do? And read the code. It said you need to pave to to a point where it leads to the backyard. And at the counter with planning staff, looked at a map and said, so if we pave to this point, we should be good, right? Because this is the side yard, thinking the little jog out was the side yard. Apparently there was miscommunication. I misunderstood that 10 feet of paving that we ended up doing is technically still the front yard. And so we went back through the process to have Dan come and, finalize the inspection. And he said, no, this still isn't right. So then we went back and talked with Julie, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, what's the front yard? What's the side yard? What can we do? And so in the end, we're a 470 square foot house with roughly 750 square feet of paving. It just seems excessive to pave all of that area. And I think, that's why we're here. It's not a health hazard. It's not a fire hazard. It's pretty much keeping the status quo for the most part. Yeah, there's more paving there. The tenants right now, they're kind of using it as a patio, but they would going to put that back and put the 2 cars off the street in the wintertime. There is parking on Maxwell. And it is a snow route, but it's not a marked snow route. So it's like a no-tow snow route, according to the city map. So there's plenty of parking. The other side of the street is the cemetery. There's no parking signs there. And then we do have signatures from all our neighbors saying that they're fine if we don't make any changes.
That's where the curb cut is where the current driveway is, by the way. The curb
Yeah.
cut is where the driveway is now. Just
And,
something
and
interesting.
that's the challenge. If the curb cut was to the south and it led to the side yard, this wouldn't be an issue, but the curb cut and everything just leads right to the little jog out in the house. And it just makes everything complicated. Anyway. So I don't know what other questions or here's. Do you guys think this?
That's a neighbor signatures there.
What else? What else am I forgetting? Yeah, it just is excessive. I mean, if I were paving 6 foot of sidewalk, I would happily do it. But it's like all this extra paving for 2 cars for 1 bedroom, 470 square foot house. Tell me to plant some trees, Anyway, that's where we're at.
Questions for the applicant? Okay. You can go have a seat for now.
Sit down.
Is that it? Thank you. Thanks for your time and
We may have some questions, before it's done, but you can give Jackie your orange card, or she can get it. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak to this? Go ahead, come on up. Name and address, please.
Dennis Heberlin, I own the property at 1123 Maxwell.
Hey, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I take it you don't want to pave the south part of it.
we just want to leave it as is.
Well, the thing I got from the city just said they wanted to park in the front yard. So I would agree with what she had with having the rest of it paved. To just park in the front yard, I'm opposed to that. Some of those properties are rental properties. 1123 Maxwell isn't, 1125 Maxwell isn't. 1119, the same thing they had, their daughters, people that own it, their daughter lives there. I don't know how many rental people are in the house, but that red Honda Element you can see in that picture has sat there the entire summer, hasn't been moved. So, I would say if they want to pave that and park on the south side of what driveway there is there, fine. But if they're just going to park in the yard, I'm opposed to it.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Any other comments from staff?
I just have one more comment. There was an error in the staff report that I forgot to point out in my presentation earlier. On finding C, staff made an error in stating that it is a snow route and there is not parking allowed on the street, and that's obviously incorrect. And I verified that there was no signage related to parking, no parking on the street. So I just wanted to make that point out that correction that I forgot to.
Thank you. Any other comments from the applicant? Okay. We'll close the hearing at this time and bring it to discussion and evidence from the board.
I have another question for staff.
Okay.
How is what's existing, the added pavement, and like you see in that picture, different when comparing between rental and non-rental?
It's not. So you would still be required the same number of parking stalls as a single family home, owner occupied. However, there's not an inspection or a property maintenance code. So it was existing, it was built that way initially. So if you came in as a home owner occupied property and said, what do I need to comply? We would have given the same answer, but there's no enforcement process to make you comply because there's no property maintenance requirements for owner occupied homes.
Other questions? Somebody ready for a motion?
So to approve this, we'd have to somehow address B1, 2, C, and D,
Yes.
right?
Pardon me?
For us to approve this, it still needs to meet code. So we have to find that this meets code somehow in opposition to what the staff's recommended. So they do find it to meet code on, what's that? On A.
A was met.
A's met.
On the screen? Can that be shown on the screen?
C3, and then, yeah, that's the only two.
So A was met.
A was met,
B1 was not met.
right. The land in question cannot yield a reasonable return.
B2 is not met.
B2, land of the owners is due to unique circumstances, right?
B3 was met.
B3 was met.
So it's a tie.
C
That's not
is
how it
met,
works.
or C is not met. Excuse me.
C is not met, right? Spirit of the ordinance shall be observed. And then substantial justice.
And D is not met. And this isn't just a vote, it's got to be.
Right, yeah.
We have to show that.
We have to show that these all meet, that we find something in here as a fact that
Different than what.
that is different than what staff has
showed.
found, yes.
Correct.
And I mean, we could go through one by one, but I think right off the bat with B1, the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return. I'm having a hard time finding a way that it can't yield a reasonable return if it's paved to the standards that, or to the code that has been set. So if you want to start on that one, if we can find some way that this is going to not yield a reasonable return.
Well, it appears to me that it's not the property owner's fault that the curb was not cut where the driveway could go past the building as in a straight shot.
But that's not what we're trying to find.
Okay,
We're trying to find, can it yield a reasonable return if we don't grant this? Is there something else that they could do to still grant a reasonable return? That's what is in the conclusion there.
I'm struggling with that one.
So unless we can find something for each of these 4 points, then I think I'll have to make a motion. I'd like to move to deny this request for a variance for 1113 Maxwell Avenue to allow parking in the front yard. We cannot find enough evidence to support the findings.
Is there a second?
I don't believe I can. I was taught by a small town city attorney that the Variance Board of Adjustments is a safety valve for hardships created by strict interpretation of the code.
Okay.
And since they don't treat non-rentals the same as rentals, that's, to me, in my mind, that's an undue hardship.
But that's not up to us to decide.
I know.
That's up to the city council to create the code as they want it to be enforced.
For purposes of the motion, I'm comfortable seconding the motion, especially so that we can go ahead and discuss it.
Right.
So I will second the motion. And then I'll open it up for board discussion on the motion,
Sure.
which is to the motion is to deny the request for a variance, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yes. Any discussion?
I mean, it starts off right at B1, and we could go to the others and try and find them, but I'm going to have a hard time finding how this can't yield a reasonable return still.
Okay.
So, unless we want to go through them all, or Mr. Shapaw has anything he wants to discuss.
Any discussion?
No, I do not have any further.
I would agree that with staff that the criterion have not been met. And I would also then question as to what our duty is to try to meet the criterion. I mean,
Right.
we decide whether the criterion had been met and weigh the evidence of whether the criterion had been met.
Right.
And I think once the evidence has been presented, we have to view it in the most favorable light we can, but I don't know that we have to, in the lack of evidence, we have to try and find evidence or discuss it until we find evidence.
Right.
Or come up with an idea to meet a criterion that hasn't been met. So
Well-
that's where I'm at, is I don't know that we can meet it because I don't believe evidence was submitted to meet it.
That's how I've viewed it as well for my previous 4.5 years here. We can only go with the evidence we have. And unless someone has more evidence that they can meet it, or if somewhere in the code we can find something that contradicts what we see there, then it's tough to go create new criteria to try and make it meet.
Yep.
I think the applicant feels she has something to
Question?
contribute. Or-
Inappropriate to ask a question at this time.
The hearing is actually closed, but I'll entertain a question, yes. I'd rather try to answer a question than restrict a question by any
So
means.
and I understand where you guys are coming from. If we're faced with denial and we can't get a letter of compliance and then we can't rent it, where does that fit into all of this? And can there be like a temporary variance to give us time to look at selling the property? Because I don't want to be faced with fines by the city because it's rented and now, I don't have a letter of compliance and, I've gotten caught in this circular argument. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
Well, there's your first one.
Where's my first one?
That financial thing.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's things you can do to the property still to return it to a point that it could be compliant. So if the code says it needs to have 2 parking stalls that are not in the front yard, and there's still more space that you can go pave to make 2 stalls that are not in the front yard, then that's what the code.
I don't understand why you can't park in a driveway. I have
That's what
cars
code
parked
says.
in my driveway when people come visit, so technically they can't park there too.
Right, and that's explained. Julie put it in the report somewhere. Did you included like the whole? I don't remember where it's at.
The parking.
Yeah, all the rules for why front yard parking is not allowed.
Yeah. So attachment B is the code language. And then, again, if this were a vacant lot and it were a brand new build, we would require the same parking it would have the same parking requirements if it were owner occupied. When they were building brand new today, this is a home that's existed in a non-conforming parking status. And one of the you have a checklist when you do your letter of compliance for a rental, and parking is just one of many things, interior and exterior, that has to comply with the code or is supposed to comply with the code.
Other questions or comments? Roll call.
Bowers?
Aye.
Schaefer?
Aye.
Morgan?
Aye.
Motion is declared approved. Any person desiring to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after the filing of this decision. Excuse me, the motion was denied. Yeah, I,
Motion carried.
motion was carried. The
To deny.
The variance denied.
variance was denied.
Yes.
I'm filling in for the chair tonight, so I apologize that I'm,
So then can I ask staff a question then? Will they be issued a cease and desist because it's rented and the renters will have to move?
We would work with them. They've already, I can't speak for the inspection department and all of their policies and procedures, but we'll work with them. It's a reasonable process. We have been working with them. We haven't issued citations up until this point. I'm assuming that will continue until we can reach a remedy, whether they decide to pay and comply or otherwise.
We did have a fourth item on the agenda tonight, but that was pulled before the meeting started tonight by the applicant who had asked for that to be on the agenda. So motion to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I
Meeting adjourned.